Looks like we are live. We are live. Just hopped on here. This is actually the first time I try this on YouTube, and just gonna do some practice on PixInsight on editing some old data that I have of the Orion Nebula. So I'm gonna pull up those stacks now. I'm not starting from scratch here. I am starting with my stacks already done. So I did drizzle. So these stacks are supposed to be at a pretty decent resolution. And my chat window doesn't want to pop up. There we go. All right, I'm gonna have to shrink the PixInsight screen a little bit so I can see the chat, the YouTube chat. There we go. Or not. All right, I'll just pop it up every now and then and see if anybody has left any comments. So here we go. All right, get rid of these rejection maps. And we're gonna rename these. We're gonna rename these stacks. This is supposed to be the sulfur stack, so we'll just call it S2. That should be oxygen here. We'll name that O3. And we will name hydrogen alpha HA. And if we auto stretch them, or use the STF auto stretch, it's quite a bit of data on the hydrogen alpha line there. On oxygen, it's not too bad, and sulfur is almost as good as hydrogen. This is a very easy target. It's one of the first, typically for beginners, but I mean, those of us who've been doing it for a while, I mean, it doesn't get old. So I'm gonna close this Discord chat real quick, avoid any pop-ups. There we go. All right, so what I like to start off with, if you notice, they're kind of out of alignment. Got some looking crooked here. So I like to start off with a star alignment. So I'm gonna use the one that's pretty much the worst as far as orientation alignment. So I'm gonna roll with this one as the source image, or rather a reference image. So it's gonna be oxygen. It's already set up, but if it wasn't, I would have just dragged here, dragged the identifier. So hydrogen alpha would go here. Oops, let's clear that up. It's gonna duplicate. So we'll drag the identifier for hydrogen alpha here, and for sulfur, same thing. And we're gonna hit this icon here, apply global. And what's gonna happen is PixInsight is going to align the stars in all three images by using the oxygen 3 stack as the reference. So it's gonna stack the hydrogen alpha and the oxygen 3 stacks as in accordance to what it sees in the oxygen stack. So I'm gonna create 2 new stacks for hydrogen alpha and for sulfur, and there they are. So once these are there, I can delete the originals, or not delete. I can close them out. I'm not gonna delete the originals. All right. So now we're aligned. Now that the stars are quite literally aligned, so I'll auto stretch these again. And now I'm gonna do what is called a dynamic crop. Got to get rid of this clipping here, this black area. So we're gonna go to the oxygen stack, and let's go about right there. Should be good, but I got to drag this down just a tiny bit. There we go. All right, so I need to make sure this crop matches between all 3 stacks. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this icon here to the other 2. So it's going to copy the exact same crop that I started in the oxygen stack it's going to copy it on the other two stacks. So that way we have everything matching up when we have to combine these three stacks to create our colored image, our nonlinear image. So we're going to execute now. I'm going to say yes to that warning. Let's see how this looks. Check any potential messages. All right, not seeing much going on there. Okay. So we have everything cropped exactly between the three stacks. So now what I'm gonna move on to is not star alignment, star exterminator. I'm gonna take the stars out. Where is it? Oh, here we go. It's a little late, guys, so I'm a little bit tired, but that's okay. Wanted to hop on here, hopefully be able to chat it up with some of you guys, and hopefully somebody hops on, but if not, that's fine. I believe this will be recorded and published as a separate video, so you guys will get a pretty good idea of what I get into when I process these images, whether or not you're into astrophotography. This is a pretty good exposure into what I do, no pun intended. The star extermination always takes a while. There's a lot of work going on in the back end, and it takes a while, especially with these stacks essentially being about 40 megapixels in size. I think they actually might be larger. But now we're at 83% for star extermination, star removal. We are going to re-add the stars later. All right, so there we go. Stars were removed. And that's what the oxygen emission line looks like without stars. Rather impressive, but we're gonna clean this up quite a bit later. All right, moving on. We're going to we got to do this with all three stacks. So now we're gonna move on to the hydrogen alpha stack. This one is always the one that looks really awesome without stars. Hydrogen is pretty much the most abundant element in the universe, and there's plenty of it in a lot of these nebulae. So when you do the starless versions of these stacks, even the finished images, it looks really nice. It looks beautiful. All right. Yeah, and this takes a while. We're at 50%. Right now, I don't know if you guys can hear that music in the background. I'm a metalhead. I'm listening to Polaris's new album. It's called Fatalism, and it's been on repeat for the past several days. It's an amazing album. These guys are out of Australia, and not surprisingly, they're named after a star. Named after the North Star, Polaris. So my musical tastes, my astrophotography endeavors kind of span over to my musical tastes as well. So this is one of my favorite bands. Another one is called Starset. They're one of my favorite bands as well. Their music is also really good, and I always enjoy listening to them when I'm doing this. All right, so we're moving on to the third stack for, the third star removal for Sulfur, for the Sulfur emission line. So for those of you who aren't really into this, what do I mean by emission line? So what I mean by emission line is I shoot with a monochrome camera. My camera is natively incapable of capturing color data. So what I have to do is I have to use a number of different filters. And since I live close to the city, I have to use what are called narrowband filters. And those are quite preferable for astrophotographers that are that live in light polluted areas, because narrowband filters are very good at blocking out most light pollution and quite a bit of moonlight. Well, at least the hydrogen alpha filter is pretty good at blocking moonlight, but the other oxygen's not that great. Sulfur is so-so. But these narrowband filters, they are specifically designed to only allow light that's being emitted by specific gases in a nebula. And the three most common gases that are typically an at least emission nebulae are hydrogen alpha, sulfur 2, and oxygen 3. These are ionized gases that produce their own light. They emit their own light, and they emit a very specific wavelength of light. Think of it as a fingerprint. So filters were invented so that they only allow light to pass through from sulfur, hydrogen alpha, and oxygen 3. And it's just ideal for the city astrophotographer, because again, they're better at blocking overall light pollution. All right, so moving on. I'm going to do some background extraction. As you can see here, there's sort of a gradient going on here with oxygen, and case in point, oxygen 3 is just light pollution. More light pollution tends to bleed through into this one. So I usually just do an automatic background extractor. And that was the wrong one. I think I already have it open on this side here. I do. So we're gonna do some subtraction. We're gonna drag this over to apply I usually just leave the default. So we're gonna drag that over to oxygen 3, and it didn't do too bad. I could probably run with this, so I'm gonna leave that as is. Moving on to hydrogen alpha, we're gonna apply some background extraction from this. It's not gonna make much of a difference. Well, I was wrong. It did make quite a bit of a difference. And then sulfur. All right, so there we go. So it more or less corrects the background. It evens it out a little bit more. Oxygen 3 is always kind of harder to work with, but hydrogen alpha, sulfur 2 looks pretty good now. From here, I like to move on to the actual stretching of the image. Right now, this is just a sample stretch. It's not the actual stretch, and what I mean by stretching is the photos or the exposures that come from my camera. This is usually what it looks like when it's loaded onto PixInsight or to a computer. It looks like this. It's really dark, but the data is there. Doesn't mean there's nothing there. The information is there. We just have to bring it out. And for that, I like to use this new tool. Well, at least as of this video, it's a relatively new tool called Generalized Hyperbolic Stretch. So as you can see here, the histogram, it's linear. So you may hear astrophotographers say that you may hear astrophotographers refer to an image as linear or non-linear. So when an image has been stretched, it becomes non-linear because the histogram curves. It doesn't become linear anymore. So check some here potential comments real quick. I don't see anything. I'm hoping that this is working because I'm not even logged into YouTube right now. I'm just using OBS to broadcast. Now, I'm going to zoom in to see where the information is. Okay, so we have a little bit of empty space here. So I want to adjust the black point to about right here. All right, we're gonna apply that change, reset, and now I want to set the symmetry point about right here. Send that over. And now we're going to start our stretch. So let's do a real-time preview. I'm going to start our stretch here. As you can see, it is now a non-linear image. So Is this oxygen? Yeah, I think this is oxygen. All right, so I don't want to go too hard on this. Now, I will admit this. The core of the Orion Nebula is very difficult to properly expose, and I blew it out with the data from last year. So the trapezium cluster, which is around this area here, it's not gonna be visible. It's gonna be blown out a bit. So this I do the best I can here to minimize the highlights there, but we do have some clipping. There was some definitely overexposed here, so we're not gonna get to see the trapezium cluster. But we're gonna finish with the first stretch here. And I usually stretch one image more than once. And let's see here. We're gonna do, let's see, I wanna bring out some of the fainter data there a little bit. So we're gonna click there, set the symmetry point, and we're gonna do a little bit of a stretch. There, I don't like to stretch it too hard because then we end up with noise. So let's try a very minimal stretch here, and then we'll set the local intensity to, there we go. That's a little better. Protect the highlights if I can, as best I can. That also will affect the shadows. So if that's the case, bump it back up, and then we'll bring the shadows back up a little bit. There we go. All right. So I think the oxygen looks good here. All right, so we're gonna move on to stretching the, let's see what we got next. Let's leave the best for last. Let's move on to sulfur, because the hydrogen alpha is always fun to stretch. All right, so the black point here is good enough for me, so I'm gonna set the symmetry point about right there. And I'm gonna start stretching sulfur. Oh, there we go. All right. I think right about there looks good. All right, there we go. We'll start off with that stretch there. All right, reset this. And then we're gonna do a second stretch. Again, I wanna bring out some of those fainter details. So, all right, we'll set the symmetry point to that. I'm gonna do just a tiny stretch there. Okay, and then set the local intensity a little bit. All right, protect the highlights. Bring out the shadows. Okay, and we're gonna apply that. We're gonna reset the real-time preview, and let me see. Let's try one more stretch. A little bit of the darker area, and let's see how this looks. I don't like it. I don't like it when it starts looking a little noisy. I think that's as far as I'm gonna go with sulfur. So we'll apply that. You can actually see the trapezium quite well on the sulfur emission line, but on hydrogen alpha and oxygen is where it really blows out. All right, so I'm gonna close that out, and it's time for the good one, for the hydrogen emission line. All right, so I'm gonna look at the black point. That looks good enough to me. I don't like seeing too much space there, but this is good. Okay, so we're gonna set this up around the middle, and now we're gonna start stretching this bad boy out. I love working with hydrogen data. All right, so yeah, look at that. Look at all that. Look at all that dust around. So I really like to bring out the dust around this. The Orion Nebula, is so much going on in this area of the sky. So, all right. Just checking comments real quick. Just make sure I'm not missing anything. Now, again, I'm using OBS to broadcast directly to YouTube, so I don't actually have YouTube open. And hopefully comments are not being blocked or not coming through. I mean, We'll see. But anyway, moving on. Hydrogen alpha. All right. I would say that's a good stretch for now, and do the local intensity. This one I could really push because there's just so much going on there, so the noise won't be very noticeable. And either way, there is a noise reduction tool that I'll be using later to smooth things out. So let's run with that stretch for now. Reset the live preview, and then we're gonna move on to a second stretch if possible. Let's see. All right, we'll do that. Click on this to set the symmetry point here on one of the darker areas. See what that does. Oh, that's great. So that gives us some pretty good contrast. Oh wow. Okay, so that looks really good now. I'm really starting to push it. I'm trying to be careful not to overdo it either, because at some point the noise is going to be super obvious. All right, so let's protect some of the highlights. All right, protect shadows. Okay, so we're gonna apply this and reset the real-time preview. I think I may do one more stretch here. Let's go right here again, right down the middle of the hump there. And nah, it'll probably be ever so subtle. Yeah, there we go. And let me see if I could reduce the highlights even further. Yeah, okay, so that'll do. So let's apply this. Okay, so now we have all three of our stacks stretched. So now they are all non-linear. At this point, we're ready to combine these three channels. So those of you, again, who aren't really into this, I use a color palette that was popularized by the Hubble telescope team. It's called the Hubble Palette. So the way that this works with colorizing, color cameras, their sensors have what's called a Bayer filter. So the Bayer filter is basically it's a filter that's integrated into the sensor, and it consists of a grid of tiny squares, and each one of those squares is in front of each pixel on the sensor, and each one of those squares is either red, green, or blue. All right. So monitors, TVs, LCD displays, most of them use this. So if you really zoom in on a display, you'll see the individual red, green, and blue pixels on the screen. And when they're combined, you see what you see on a color screen. The combination of those red, green, and blue pixels produces a colored image. So with narrowband, or with monochrome astrophotography, you can pretty much use any color palette you want. You have a lot of wiggle room, but the Hubble team popularized their palette, which assigns hydrogen alpha to the green channel. It assigns oxygen 3 naturally to the blue channel. I would personally associate oxygen with the color blue for some reason. And sulfur is assigned to the red channel. All right. Watch what happens when we combine these three channels. Boom. That's what you get. Now, I wouldn't call it a disadvantage. One of the challenges of the Hubble palette is the green. As you can see, the image is overly green. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use another new tool, well, new as of this video, called narrowband normalization. All right. and the palette that we're using, there's a list. There's hydrogen, oxygen, oxygen. The one that we're using is SHO, sulfur, hydrogen, oxygen. So red for sulfur, green for hydrogen, blue for oxygen. Let's turn on the light preview. The live preview rather, and let's use preserve lightness adjustment, and there's a tool called SCNR. Gets rid of the green. Boom, gone. Now that looks much better. All right, now what we can do here is we can boost the excuse me, we can boost each emission line if we wanted to. So we can boost oxygen. Hydrogen alpha is not listed here because it's usually the most prominent anyway. So we can boost oxygen. That's a little much. I think that's right there to me is good. And then we can boost sulfur. You can't really tell much of a difference, but other than the surrounding dust is being it's taking on more color. So let's see. Excuse me. All right, so I get a little picky with the sulfur, because if you can tell, it's really oversaturating parts of the interior here and the Running Man Nebula here. So I'm probably gonna leave well enough alone. All right, and we'll set the shadow point a little low. Highlight reduction, we can still do a highlight reduction here, but I think we've done enough with the generalized hyperbolic stretch already. Well, I'm going to increase the brightness a bit, see how that works out. See, there we go. That dust is really starting to come out. All right, so we're gonna, yeah, that looks good. We're gonna run with this. Let me check for any comments real quick. Nothing going on there. All right, get rid of the live preview, and there we go. This is what we're dealing with now. All right, so from here, I'm going to saturate a little bit further. So I'm going to try saturating the dust here. I am interested in seeing what, let me see. Okay, so it's gonna be, all right, so it's gonna be mostly in the reds here. So I'm gonna do a linear interpolation, and I'm gonna set a point here and then a point here. Let's launch live preview and right here. This is the point that we're gonna saturate. So if you can tell, the dust around the Orion Nebula is being saturated with more color. So that to me, all right, that's too much. Right there's fine. Maybe we could mess with the blues a little bit. All right, yeah, let's do that. Just a smidgen. There we go. We'll apply those changes, and there we go. All right. So we have color saturation going. Now I'm gonna move on to curves transformation. Let's see if we can add a little more contrast to the image. So let's mess with the shadows and the midtones. All right, just a little bit. You know what? No, there's a better way to do this. Let me cancel this out. I'm gonna do a local histogram equalization. This is usually the settings I like to go with, because anything above, in my opinion and through my eyes, anything above a 0.25 amount here is gonna be overkill. But you'll see in a minute, it's going to it's going to sharpen the image and increase the contrast a bit. So, excuse me, I think it's going to look pretty nice. It's going to be it might be a rather subtle change, but let me see if you guys can tell. There we go. So it sharpened things up a little bit, did a little more contrast. I like it. Or actually, to be honest, I think it might be a little much. Let me see. No, it's good. It's good. And then from here, we do a HDR multi-scale transform. So it'll kind of equalize, or it'll give better balance between the highlights and midtones. And this usually takes a while. If anybody's leaving comments right now and OBS isn't pushing them through, I apologize. I'm really sorry about that. When I review the recording, I'll see if comments were actually coming through or being made. All right, so HDR multi-scale transform is done. Okay, so now I'm going to do some noise removal. So I'm going to use Noise Exterminator. I love this tool. The RC Astro tools have been extremely helpful with my workflow. They have cut my workflow so short. Like it's crazy. It used to take me so much longer to process an image. Now, I mentioned earlier in the stream that I already had my stacks done before starting this broadcast. So that in itself takes 45 minutes to an hour, depending on how much data that you're stacking. So that's why I skipped this part of my practice session here, because it just takes way too long. So Noise Exterminator has applied. In case you can't tell, I'm going to undo it. And let's zoom in and let's redo it. It gets rid of the noise very well and preserves details very well. So I love this tool. These RC Astro tools have just been a miracle to work with. And I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, it's been, the tools in themselves are miraculous, because it just makes everything so much easier, and your workflow just has a potential to get cut so much shorter. You save so much time. So we're done processing the starless version of this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clone this. I'm going to call this M42_starless. The Messier designation for the Orion Nebula is M42. So that's why I'm calling it that. And then this one we'll just call M42. All right, so now what we did, we're going to set these aside for now. All right, so what we did with the stacks for the actual object, we now have to do the same for the star masks. All right, so here we have the masks for the oxygen, the stars from the oxygen stack, sulfur, and hydrogen. So I'm going to reset the I call it the example stretch, or the sample stretch. And we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to use a different tool this time for these. It's a tool that I like to use called ArcSine Stretch. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. And for the Orion Nebula, I usually, the stretch factor, I usually adjust according to the target. And in some targets, there are a ton of stars. In other targets, there isn't a lot. In some targets, some stars are brighter than they are on other targets. So with the Orion Nebula, it's kind of it was a little tricky. If I go 100, like for me, that's already a little, the stars are already getting a little too bloated. If we go 200, for me, this is too much. So we're going to go down to 50. Actually, let's do 100. Let's do 100. I don't like too few stars in my images, but I also don't like too many stars or stars that are too bloated. So we'll stick with 100 as a stretch factor, and we'll apply that to all 3 star masks. All right, so there we go. So there's a stretched sulfur star mask. We're gonna stretch the hydrogen star mask, and we're gonna stretch the oxygen star mask. There we go. And now we're gonna combine the channels of these star masks. So we'll start with oxygen, assign that to blue. We'll assign hydrogen to green, and we will assign sulfur to red. All right, so here, checking for comments once again, and back here real quick. So we have the star masks assigned to their respective channels. I'm gonna hit this icon to combine. Got a little bit of an artifact there, but it typically goes away. I've noticed it goes away when we combine the stars with the Orion Nebula's actual with the finished stack of the Orion Nebula. So for this, you can't see, or there are a few green stars, so we have to run SCNR for the star mask as well, so it'll get rid of any green there. There we go. And another challenge with the Hubble Palette is it tends to produce magenta stars, and there's a script for that, fortunately, that will get rid of them. So it's called, surprise, it's called correct magenta stars, and we're going to execute it. And unless you're looking really close, you can't really tell, but if you're on the live, but they're there, and now they're gone. All right, so now what we do at this point is we're going to use one final tool called Pixel Math. And we're actually going to rename this stars. All right, so let's rename it stars. We're going to run Pixel Math. So what this formula is going to do, this expression, it's going to combine the main image with the star mask that we just created. So let's go ahead and knock that out. We'll apply the changes, and bam, there you go. We have stars on the Orion Nebula image now. All right, so one last thing that I like to do before we export this into a TIFF file or a JPEG, if you're ready to share to the world, is one last RC Astro tool called Blur Exterminator. This is gonna correct any distortion with the stars at the edges. At least for me, it works very well. It also gets rid of some of the blur in this image. Believe it or not, as sharp as it looks, there's still a minimal amount of blur. So this basically, we joke around in the in one of the Discord channel, in one of the Discord servers I'm in, we joke around that Russ Croman found a way to straight up delete the atmosphere, because there can be some atmospheric interference that can affect the quality of your images, and Blur Exterminator also addresses that. And this also does take a while to run. The difference might be subtle, but if you're an astrophotographer and you've used this tool before, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This thing is witchcraft. It's going to further sharpen the image. It's going to make some corrections to any stars that might be distorted or a little bit stretched. And it's ridiculous how well this tool works. And I mean that in a good way. And it does take a while. A lot of stuff going on the back end. And it takes its time. So we're at about 65% right now. All right. Again, guys, my apologies if you're leaving any comments. If anybody's even watching this and leaving any comments, they're supposed to pop up right here, and I'm seeing nothing. So either nobody's watching or they're just not going through. So my apologies for that. If I do see comments later in the recording that I missed, I will respond. And one thing I don't like about going off screen with PixInsight is when a process like this is running, the screen just goes blank. But it's doing the work. All right, so it's going to further reduce some stars. It's going to further reduce stars and sharpen the image a little more. So if I undo it, we can undo it. There we go. Let's see if I can zoom in, if we can show what's going on. So there we go, blur, external. So there we go. We undo. You can tell the biggest difference is with the stars. The stars get a little bit sharpened and they get reduced a little further. But there is some sharpening going on with the main object itself. And the last step I usually do excuse me, I'm tired, guys. It's late. It's almost 11. But from here, the last step that I always do Blur Exterminator is the last step I always do for processing. After this, I'm ready to either export to a TIFF file to further edit in Lightroom, which I don't need to do here, in my opinion. So in which case, the last thing I do to wrap things up is File, Save As. We'll call this Orion Practice, since it was a practice run. And I'm going to save it as a JPEG. I don't plan on exporting this. I gotta rename it. Okay, so Orion Practice, and I'll just save it as a JPEG. Quality will be 100, and leave everything else default. And that's it, guys. That's usually how long it takes me to process an image. We are around clocking in at 42 minutes. So it takes me a little less time. Right now it took a little longer because I'm narrating and I'm talking, but this is usually the amount of work it takes into just editing or processing these stacks alone. The integration process, which is pretty much the process of gathering the individual photos on a nightly basis, that's what can take a lot longer. So we're looking at, depending on how many exposures you want to take, if you're using a monochrome camera, you're looking at maybe 3 to 14 days, depending on depending on how many clear nights you have, first of all, because the weather plays a huge part in how long it may take you to acquire the exposures that you would like to process something like this, right? So for me, this only took me 3 nights. I believe it was only, I think it was only about 3 hours on each filter. So this is only about 6 hours of data, if I recall correctly. I could be wrong, but I have tried 6 hours per filter. So for all I know, this could be around that long. But for me, it usually takes about 3 to 14 days to gather all the individual exposures that I want to stack and come up with a final image. So that's it, guys. Thank you for hopping on. If anybody even hopped on, if anybody's watching, and if anybody's leaving comments, again, I'm so sorry I can't see them here. I'm not sure if I'm willing to bet nobody's even watching, which is fine. It happens. It doesn't hurt my feelings. But if that's the case, then hopefully that is the case, because I would really have hated to miss your comments. But again, if anybody left comments and this ends up being saved as a recording on YouTube for later viewing, and I do see comments on there, I will go through and I will respond. So with that said, y'all, thank you for joining. Thank you for watching this. I appreciate it. For those of you who aren't into this and were just strictly curious, this is the work that it takes when it comes to astrophotography. So take care, everybody. Thank you again for your support. Thank you for following. Make sure to subscribe if you're into astrophotography or astronomy in general. Subscribe to the channel. I'm on all social media platforms. The name is the same across the board. So make sure to look for me on Instagram, on Facebook, and on TikTok.